A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy of Sweetfish Media. Today I've got with me Haley Martin, who is VP of Marketing at AMTdirect. Haley, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, of course, it's my pleasure. I'm super excited to talk to you and get into the topic today, which is how to navigate your first 30 to 90 days as a new person in leadership, a new VP of marketing. We've got some really good talking points to get into. But before we do that, I'd like you to take just a couple minutes here and let us know a little bit about your background and what you guys have been up to these days at AMTdirect.
Sure. Well, I don't know how much I can tell you about AMTdirect since I am on day 32 here, but I have a lot of experience leading marketing for other technology companies. So I was the director of marketing for a very high growth tech company in Charlotte for 6 years and then transitioned over here. So a lot of it is starting to feel familiar again, although I'm still drinking from the fire hose.
Yeah, I bet. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. You were sharing with me offline about some of the sort of systematic, actionable things that you were able to do to sort of, just keep your head from spinning when it comes to this first few days. And I'm sure it's stuff that a lot of our listeners could benefit from. Let's start with, what did you do to prepare before even joining the organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I got hired as the VP of marketing, my responsibilities expanded. So even though I had experience leading teams and managing mostly demand gen at my previous company, this job came with additional responsibilities in terms of PR, branding, communications, things that I didn't have a ton of experience doing. And so I Googled, that was first step one, 30, 60, 90-day plans for, marketing leaders, or what to do to make sure that your first 30 days at a new job are successful. And I've got to be honest, there wasn't a ton of what I would consider really, really good content out there. There was one article that I read, and then I feel like every other article I read had just basically copyrighted everything that the first article stated. So I decided, there's bits and pieces of it that I wanted to apply, but then I just wanted to craft my own. So I did a lot of research. I wanted to walk in and understand the company and their competitive landscape right away. So I just did a ton of research. I basically compiled my version of their competitor analysis and buyer personas before I walked in the door.
Wow.
So that I could, instantly hit the ground running. I think that was one of the things that I knew I was getting myself into, was some pretty ambitious growth goals. And I didn't know, what my budget was going to look like. I didn't know if I was going to have a really strong team. I was coming in blind to some things.
Right. So first of all, I love that step one, Google, a woman after my own heart. But so what you described here means you had to have a plan. And because, like you said, the content wasn't out there, you created one yourself, this 30, 60, 90-day plan. Dig into that a little bit for us.
Yeah, so my first step was reflecting on past experience. So at my last company, I watched a lot of leadership change. And, some leaders came in and I thought that they did a great job navigating that process. And other leaders came in and they didn't do such a great job. And they rubbed people the wrong way and they made decisions too fast. And so I wanted to basically do everything that I saw that had worked really well, which was ask a lot of questions, make no assumptions, get to know people, spend time in the break room or the cafeteria or wherever, the watering hole, getting to know people on a personal level, and identify some things that you can do really quick to make an impact that aren't going to, ruffle feathers.
Sure. Yeah, and I like you and I talked about offline. I suspected that some of the things that were in your plan would be things that were applicable when you're starting any new role. And I think that what you're talking about is so important, especially like taking your time, being where the conversations are taking place there in the trenches, so to speak, and taking your time with making those kinds of decisions. Part and parcel of that is how you were then evaluating the team that you were going to be leading at that point. Talk a little bit about your process or your approach to evaluating the performance of folks on that team.
So that's much easier said than done. And I'm still not completely done with that process. I think I was in a pretty unique situation because when I started, I was working with a lot of consultants and agencies, so not a lot of full-time employees here. So I think that made it in some ways easier and in other ways more complicated because a lot of the people that I am now managing aren't physically here. So there's not face-to-face time, and it's harder to get a gauge on productivity and experience and knowledge and passion and interest. But the first thing that I did was just schedule one-on-one meetings with everybody. And for the ones that are here at lunch or at coffee, somewhere where you can get out of the office and, start the conversation on a personal level of getting to know each other. For the remote employees, just spend a lot of time asking them questions. It was about them, not about me. And the truth is that because of that, I learned a lot more about even what they thought they were doing well and what they thought they weren't doing well. And I think, believe it or not, most people are more self-aware than you realize. And if you just let them talk, they'll even just share with you the truth about where their strengths and weaknesses are.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So just a little tidbit here, we at Sweetfish Media are a 100% remote team. And to your point, yes, it can be a challenge, or at least something you've got to be extremely intentional about as far as getting that FaceTime, so to speak, and getting a gauge on the things that you talked about and trying to have some semblance of a cohesive culture when you're not face to face. So yeah, you're sort of preaching to the choir when you talk about, how intentional you were about that and what kind of went into it. And I know that, like you said, you're on what, day 32? Day 32.
Day 32. I'm hanging in there.
Happy day 32. And it's, you haven't really been there long enough to sort of have a lot of the traditional measures of success or wins in this kind of role. But talk about so far, what have been some of the quick wins, little notches in your belt that you've been able to point to and feel like you're on the right track so far?
Yeah, so the first thing was just reporting. Because of my background in demand gen, I'm heavily, analytical, and I make my decisions based off of data. So that does make it a little bit easier. When I started, they were using a CRM that I had never worked in before. So that was a little bit challenging, just navigating it and figuring out how to get the information that I needed. And some of it existed and some of it didn't. So for some things, we're starting to track now things that we weren't doing a month ago. And so we're just establishing a baseline. But getting all of the reporting and dashboards in place and working with the leaders here to identify, what are our KPIs, what's really important, was one of the very first things that I did really in the first 2 weeks I was here. Because if we can't all articulate what success looks like in the same way, we're not going to get anywhere. And I quickly learned that we were, as a company, maybe, using definitions differently, saying words, when one person would say something and they meant something completely different from the other person, but they were using the same language. And so just really getting a handle on what are our KPIs, what are we going to track, what's most important to the business, can we all agree on this, and here's the terminology that we're going to use going forward to avoid any confusion.
I love it. And these are things, again, that are just so important. I've been in situations where, and something as little as, making the distinction between whether we're talking about a prospect or a future customer. And some people are just saying customer, and we're all talking about the same thing, but emphasizing how important it is and how valuable it will be long-term to have that framework. And so your mindset, even going into this, that was like, look, I need to have a plan for myself. I need to establish a plan to evaluate the folks that I'm going to be working with. And then we as an organization need to have this plan for what success looks like. It's just so smart. And I think something that so many people can learn from. So thanks for sharing all that with us in all of your 32 days of success so far there at AMTdirect. One of the things before we wrap this up that we've been doing here at Sweetfish Media is, because what we aim to be is a learning hub, a free learning hub for folks in this space. To your point, right? You said you went out and you were looking for information on, how to, and it just didn't exist. So we try to be a place where we're constantly creating that by picking the minds of folks like you who are smart and who are doing successful things in the space. What are you learning from? What's the blog you're reading, podcast you're listening to, book you're reading that you or your team is really interested in or getting some value from right now?
Yeah, well, I have a lot of resources I could share. I'm a big believer in self-learning, but one podcast I listen to regularly is Demand Gen Radio. It's very specific to people that are in demand gen for the most part. But if that's something that you're doing or you're interested in, I really can't think of a better source. They have over 100 episodes and they've interviewed some of the greatest marketers out there, specifically B2B. So really great podcast. Another, book I could recommend is Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In. I don't know if you've read it. I'm almost done. Embarrassingly enough, I've been reading it for a year because I have an 18-month-old son. So it's taking me a little longer than it should have. But I think for any woman in leadership or aspiring to be in leadership, it's a must read.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's one that's my Audible right now of books that have been started and are 1/3 or quarter of the way finished is a little embarrassing. So the fact that you are at least finishing it is a win. I congratulate you, especially with the baby at home. Congrats, by the way.
Thank you.
So yeah, no, I think Lean In is like one of those sort of evergreen ones that you can't go wrong as a recommendation. So thanks for sharing that with us. Haley, how can folks connect with you? I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to pick your brain a little bit more and learn more about how you've been able to, handle drinking from the water hose in this first few days of your role, and just sort of keep up with what you're doing. How can we connect with you?
Yeah, I would love it if everyone would just connect with me on LinkedIn. It's just, the regular www.linkedin.com/IN/Haley Martin.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, guys. We have gotten a lot of, like I said, valuable stuff from you, how to prepare, how to have a plan, and how to measure those quick wins right out of the gate when you're starting a new leadership role like VP of Marketing. Haley, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. You too.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.